Hello everyone. Welcome to HeartWise Leadership. Glad to see you here. We're really glad to welcome you for yet another of our episodes. This time we're going to be talking about masculine and feminine energy and what that means and how that shows up. But first, let me do a quick introduction. So we have here TRICIA LIVERMORE, who's a heart-centered mindset coach for women. We have Teri Swope, who's a heart-led coach and consultant for small to mid-sized businesses, and myself, Sarah Slyke, who help women break through their inner glass ceiling as a women-centered coach. And together we have quite a bit of experience. We have over 65 years of leadership experience, and we're using that experience and our recent growth to make this program to inspire and support compassionate, heart-centered leadership. We believe that conscious leadership is the key to unleashing power and potential in individuals, organizations, and the world. So if you're here, you're part of this vital shift towards more compassionate leadership, and we're very glad to see you. So as a quick arrival practice, which is something that we've done a few times, and just as an explanation, that's a way of getting all of us kind of here, acknowledging where we're at, preparing us to be together in this space. And we're going to do something a little bit different, which won't require closing your eyes, which often they do. And I'm going to assume that you probably have some sort of beverage nearby. And if you don't, just kind of pay attention and think about this for the next time. I just have a simple glass of water. And what I'd like you to do is take whatever container you have, and maybe you have food, anything, just something that you're going to hold in your hands. And just notice what that feels like in your hands. You've got something that might be cold. It might be warm, it might be moisture condensing on the outside, firm, these kinds of things. Just notice what's there. And then pay attention to what's inside the container. Is it cold also? Is it warm? Does it have texture? And let's just take a deep breath and concentrate for just a couple seconds. And then lastly, take a sip, take a bite, what have you. And notice the sensation of that in your mouth. And as it's going down, and just take a breath to, again, just pay attention. And welcome. And hopefully what that does for you is it just kind of brings you to focus here and be here, present with what we're talking about. All right, well, what are we talking about? We are talking about masculine and feminine energy today. And so I want to first off just clarify that we are not talking about masculine people and feminine people. We are talking about the energies or the qualities of behaviors and feelings that show up in everyone. So with that foundation, we'll talk a little bit about what they mean. So Teri, if you can pull up my slide, that would be great. I put together this little slide as a way of kind of visualizing what I mean when I talk about all of us talk about masculine and feminine energy. And as with almost everything, it's a bit of a continuum. There's no black and white. There's just, shades of different types of behavior. We've labeled them healthy and unhealthy, but you'll see that probably most of us have all of these show up in our lives at some point or another. So as an easy explanation, I want to talk about first the masculine energy and then the feminine energy on the healthy side. So the masculine energy tends to be very analytical, more competitive, linear, goal-directed, stable, having stability, and assertive. And what that to me feels like is like a cityscape. There's concrete walls, there's defined boundaries, there's a man-made component to it. It is very structured and very good. You wouldn't want to try to go to an office that's not going to hold you up. You wouldn't want to make a concrete travel plan and have the airline may or may not possibly be there. So there's spaces for this masculine energy. And then the feminine energy is more on the intuitive side. It's much more collaborative. It's the space for creativity, receptivity, receptive to help, receptive to ideas, flexibility, and empathy. And again, this is a different kind of visualization. If we visualize like a rainforest or forest of some sort, it's organic and it is not as predictable as the cityscape might be. So there's space for both. And I think an example that I'd like to give in like the same person in the same event where you can show up with both masculine and feminine energy. So for example, you're at a meeting and you're going to talk about something that we need to do that's different to solve. It doesn't matter what the problem is. So I show up and I am clear that this is what I need. I need us to, I'm going to pretend, I need us to have an arrival practice at each meeting because it helps me feel more grounded. So that's assertively expressing what it is that I need. And then on the other hand, I don't have to demand that. I can say that and then acknowledge that others have their needs as well. So then that gives space for listening to someone else who might say, well, I need to start the meeting 2 minutes later because I need more time to walk or what have you. And so then I can, in my feminine energy, hear those other needs and think of ways that we can then create this, in this case, beginning of a meeting that is collaborative and meets everyone's needs. So I hope that kind of gives you a little bit of basic understanding of how you can be both, and we all are both, and they all have their place. And that's why there's the rainbow that's in the back of this slide, because that's a rainbow of feelings and beings and ways of being that's out there. And they're not necessarily good and bad. For example, a red is a warm color and a blue is a cool color. Which is better? Depends on the situation. There's not really a black and white, this is good, this is bad. It's just a rainbow of colors, and there's warm and there's cool, and they all have their place. Relatedly then, the unhealthy behaviors also show up in us. And we'll probably not spend a lot of time on the unhealthy ones in this particular episode, but we'll have opportunities for getting into that more deeply. But I want to go over them just a little bit. Like the masculine energy is this control. You'll recognize these things. We've seen this lots of places. Abuse of power, avoidance, arrogance, being highly critical, even violent. And in my earlier example of I need to have an arrival practice, I might demand, well, I don't care what you think. I want to have this arrival practice. And then the unhealthy feminine energy can show up like overwhelm, confusion, anxiety, oversensitive, powerlessness as a victim. And in my earlier example, that might look like, well, I'm not even going to share what I need because I'm just not going to get listened to. And so again, we can see it doesn't matter if you're male or female to have these types of energies show up. They're in all of us and they show up in different ways. And so what we want to get at is finding ways of being in balance, looking to the right type of energy for the right situation and trying to avoid the unhealthy manifestation of these different energies. And so that's where we want to move into our discussion today and share some examples of how this has shown up in our lives. So I think let's start out with TRICIA and ask you to kind of share a little bit of your experience with this and maybe some of your real life examples.
Yeah, thank you. I think what comes up for me is I was in tech finance for a very long time, 15 years, which means, you know, lots of project management, program management, everything is being managed, processes, and therefore, you know, you have to have some level of control over your projects and some control over your people. And I think it's really important to be able to understand the balance between needing control of the processes, the projects and things like that, but then also having an ability for people to be collaborative in that space, receptive, creative. So when you really think about the people involved, if you put people over processes, you can approach somebody and say, hey, look, this is where we're at on this particular project. Maybe they're, not meeting their target or their goal, whatever that is, but then really understanding from their perspective, like what's happening for them, right? Like what might be getting in their way, what are the challenges, really having that level of empathy and compassion for where they're at. Because the reality is when we're at work, we don't leave our personal life behind. It's part of us. We do bring that to work because that's who we are. And sometimes people have a lot of things going on in their personal life. So having some empathy and compassion, understanding that, maybe it is impacting their work, but then also allowing and giving them grace and compassion for that. And asking them what are the things that they need in order to be supported for whatever it is that they're doing. I did a lot of program and project management. And, I think going back into my own history, the more I wanted to control and tell people and dictate what needed to be done and how it needed to be done and when it needed to be done and forget about their humanity was when I had the biggest resistance, right? But the more I leaned into compassion, care, concern for them as a human being, like what's going on with them, the more I was able to figure out how to help them solve it, or we could co-create a solution or whatever that might look like. So really just being you definitely have to use your analytical side of your brain, right? So having a structure, the way I think of masculine is it's the container, right? The container is what is being built, and the feminine is how do we want to build it? What's the creative processes that we're going to utilize, and making sure that we're allowing for brainstorming and creativity and not shutting people down just because they have an idea that might be not typical. So those are some of the things that I've experienced in my leadership experience. And Teri, how about you?
Yeah, I love what you just said about the masculine energy is what we're building, the container. The way I think of feminine energy, which is really just a different way of saying what you just said, is it is allowing for the very best building of whatever it is. It's allowing for the highest levels of creativity, the highest levels of innovation, because you're drawing on the intuition of everyone that's involved. You're really leaning into collaborating and tapping into the gifts of everyone that's involved. Whereas sometimes, if there's too much masculine energy, which let's just be real about this, in the work world, in the business setting, I mean, those are the energies that have been highly valued. I can use my own corporate leadership career that spanned, almost 3 decades as an example. Early on in my career, I very much led with masculine energy, and it was very rewarded. I mean, it was very reinforced. So, and it took some sort of real big life events for me to realize I was super uncomfortable with only leading with my masculine energy and my right brain, or my left brain rather, and really tapping into the value of allowing what is natural in all of us. Sarah, I love that you made that point. We all have these energies. It has nothing to do with gender. We all have these energies. It's a matter of what we allow. So, if we're allowing what feels like compassion and empathy, and though compassion and empathy are, to me, the ones that speak to most what is missing from the workplace today. And most what has been historically viewed as weakness in leadership. And it's kind of like the biggest knob that we can turn that will unleash such tremendous potential with people at work, because everyone craves understanding and connection, and compassion unlocks that. So Carlos says here, agree that there's generally too much unhealthy masculine energy at work. And even in the world, for that matter, absolutely true, Carlos, that's absolutely true. And so understanding what does more feminine energy look like, healthy feminine energy look like, is the starting point, right? Because it's not being girly, it's not being, like we said, it's not tied to gender. It's just allowing what naturally wants to come up through us to come up. It's allowing that creative force, that connecting force that wants to come up through us. So I have, my own example of when I was a young corporate leader, rising very quickly. And I had an incident where we had a manager, very talented. I had a very good relationship with him. He was ex-military. He was very good at his job, highly respected, and honorable man. He had a family, beautiful family. I'd met them. Long story short, and this is a few decades ago, very early in my leadership career, about 5 years into my leadership career, we found out he was having an affair with his supervisor. And because of the circumstances, the way we found out, as we all know very clearly, nothing is private on a work computer. But that wasn't so clearly understood, or there wasn't, a broad awareness of that back then. And so we had found some of this information, very inappropriate stuff on his computer. And for some legal issues, I think that maybe there was some concern about privacy issues. There was concern about terminating him. And so it was decided that the very best course of action would be to get him to resign. And so he was my direct report. And I said, I think I can get him to do that. Well, the way that I did that, and by the way, I've written about this before, and it is something that I personally have had to heal from, because it's not something that I'm proud of at all. But the way that I sort of elicited a resignation from him was what I would now know was abuse of power. And it was critical, because I use shame. I use shame in judgment. And what I failed to do was recognize that he, his family was getting ready to go through a very difficult time. His family was not aware. He had young kids. And, even if I didn't disagree, or if the act itself wasn't, wasn't something that I agreed with, I still, regret the fact that I didn't hold space for the fact that he was getting ready to, go through a very, very difficult life lesson. And I made it worse. I mean, I really made it worse. So, so that is an example of me, a female, definitely living in the unhealthy side of masculine energy. But I also have a beautiful example of a male leader that I worked with, that he said, one of my strong points is compassion. And he illustrated that consistently with the people that he worked with. There was one woman that he worked with. She was very good at her job. She went through a very difficult time personally, kind of fell back into addiction. And he nurtured her through the whole thing. No judgment, no shame. He nurtured her through the whole thing. He told her, I believe in you. I know you're going through a difficult time. There is accountability here at work, and, we can't, there are things that need to get done, but I believe in you. I remember him saying that, and her coming to me later on and saying, him believing in me made all the difference in the world. So again, just to illustrate that it really has nothing to do with gender, right? Like we all do have these energies, and it's a matter of how we allow them to flow, and also how we manage them. Like I said, that instance very early in my career was applauded. I got the job done, right? Because the manager resigned, but it just felt sick in my gut at the same time. But everybody around me thought I had done a fantastic job, which is an illustration of, what is so, so wrong and toxic about leadership.
Yeah. I'll jump in. It sounds like Teri froze, but I agree. There's a lot that's gone on in corporate America that's been highly masculine energy, both healthy and unhealthy. But when we think about business, we often think of the masculine energy. Can you imagine, I have this creative intuition that I think this might be a really cool idea. And I know in my experience, there's like, okay, well, show me the data, show me the concrete plan. And it's much harder to be in that more fluid space. And in fact, as Teri was saying, most of these more analytical, hard driving type of energies were rewarded. And if you were an empathetic person, and sometimes even a creative person, that was sometimes discouraged, and that wasn't a path to move forward. But what I think we see happening now is that people have always carried both sides, and now people who maybe carry more feminine energy as a base, the way they're built, are really starting to kind of burn out or hit the end of their rope with this lack of feminine energy balance. And that's where we get this rise of emotional intelligence, or EQ, that we are seeing a need for in our society now. So I think, we're kind of going through this shift of rebalancing. So yeah, and I know we talked earlier, Tricia, you've got some great ways on, how we might actually, concretely take some steps to bring some of this forward.
Yeah, I also want to address a couple of comments. First, Francis mentions, like, are these energies related to the side of the brain that we use? And yes, left brain is typically kind of that masculine energy, the analytical, linear, goal-directed, assertive, competitive. That's really in the left brain thinking, which, most of our society has been driven off of. And then that feminine energy, that really creative, compassionate, caring aspect of our feminine is the right brain, right? So you'll think of like creatives, are very right brained. Analytical is very left brain. So there is definitely a correlation between the brains. And of course, we're not neuroscientists, but this is out there. You can find this information on the internet. And I think to Teri's point earlier, it's really being able to balancing those two things. I lived most of my life in my masculine energy, and now I'm in a place where I really, really, really focus on my right side of my brain, my feminine energy. And I have some resistance to the masculine energy because I spent so much time in it. So I really have to acknowledge that when I'm noticing the resistance. So thanks for that question, Francis. And then I'm going to go back to Carlos's question. He says, when I look at the quadrant you shared, I see that many times conflict arises when diagonals meet. And absolutely, when you get people from different groups and they have a different purpose or end goal in mind, it can be really difficult to collaborate, because people tend to want to exert their control, their power, their title, being the highest leader in the room, whatever that looks like for that particular situation. And one tool that I would definitely recommend is called Yes and. It comes from improv. It's a really great way of hearing, actively listening to another human being and noticing what they're offering. What are they saying? And then can you take 10% of that, 10% of what they said, and build on it? Yes and it. Say, yes, I really like this aspect of what you're saying. And I think we can also add this piece to it, whatever that happens to look like. And the more you can use the yes and approach, just taking 10% of what somebody else that you like about what somebody else said and really building on that, then you're in collaboration, you're in co-creation. So you've got the container, right? You've got the meeting, and you have a potential outcome that you guys are looking for, but you're co-creating what that looks like, which means that you don't necessarily know what it's going to be. So being able to build on what other people are saying is a really important skill to help in that conflict. I used to teach this in our technology organizations because in tech, we have very contentious ideas around how something should be solved. And when you can come together with a yes and approach and use that as a guideline, like offering that as a guideline for the meeting really does have a wonderful impact. And if you need some support on that, I'm happy to come in and share how that practice might work for you. And I think the other aspect of another tip or tool that you'd want to take away is an arrival practice at the beginning of a meeting. So in the workplace, we're going from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting. You barely have time to use the bathroom between meetings, or whatever that case might be. And having a place where they can just sit and be present in the moment, offering them the opportunity to just release and let go of whatever has happened in this last hour, the last few minutes, and then being present, like what's their intention? Just asking them what their intention is for this next meeting. Really get them to be inwardly focused. That's one way to have an arrival, or even just asking people without any judgment, like, where are you at right now? What's going on in your head? Are you busy? Like maybe it's just a word or a phrase that everybody can share in the room without any judgment, without any trying to solution or solve anything, and then going into the agenda. So really just allowing for some space for people to become present in the moment is also a really great way to bring in that presence, that empathy, that compassion, being receptive. It also has a lot to do with psychological safety, which I think we want to talk about in a future session around what is psychological safety and how do you employ that. But really having that empathy for other human beings is a couple of great things that you can do is the yes and the arrival practice. Any other, Teri or Sarah?
Yeah, so apologize for my connection issues, but I love the point that Carlos brought up, because I think a big challenge with the whole concept of introducing more feminine energy into the workplace is this idea, misunderstanding that the unhealthy feminine energy attributes are feminine energy. I think, and the unhealthy masculine energy, like that is masculine energy. When in fact, that's not the case at all. You know, those are the attributes. Certainly they exist. Very clearly they exist, but they're not the ones that add value. You know, it is the healthy end of the spectrum that, and balance, again, that adds value. Completely agree on the arrival practice. So the arrival practice gives space for people both to bring their full awareness to the people in the room and the topic at hand, which we don't often do. We just assume people are going to show up and they're going to be there, but they're coming from somewhere else and they're bringing that whole mental narrative with them. So having compassion for the fact that, and creating space for the fact that our brains aren't designed to jump from one thing to another like that. We really do need a space to create, you know, the next thing that we're going to focus on, create a platform for the next thing that we're going to focus on. So, and it can be, you know, it is what feels right for the person that's running that meeting. It can be as simple as 60 seconds. It can be 5 minutes. But just having that very intentional time to create space is, you know, can be just one tiny powerful step in the direction of bringing more feminine energy, bringing a little bit more balance, particularly into the workplace.
Yeah, and I think, you know, the key here is embracing who you are in a healthy way, right? So again, this has nothing to do with gender in any way, shape, or form, but understanding where are we at naturally in how we want to show up and embracing who we are in those moments in a very healthy, loving, kind way. Mm-hmm. So thank you all for joining today. Really love these kinds of conversations. We want to continue this type of conversation. We've got some other ideas around future topics. So, and we're really thinking about doing potentially a workshop on this type of energy, this masculine and feminine energy. If you're interested in joining us in a workshop, please add a comment that you're interested. We'll reach out to you. If you have any suggestions for any other future topics, please, again, comment. We really appreciate your comments and your engagement. Yeah, and then I think if there's next week, I think in 2 weeks, we're going to do a pre-recording because Teri's going to be on vacation and we want to allow her to enjoy her vacation time and also bring some new content to all of you folks. So thank you all for joining. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Bye.